Just waiting to confirm that we are live. Here we go. We appear to be live on both YouTube and Twitch. So welcome back to the Island 54 development stream where I'm building a survival crafting MMO in Unity and TypeScript. I had been working on the last stream after getting server-side terrain scatter, so that's the trees and stones and things. After getting them displaying on the client, I started working on getting inventory working properly on the server. So when you pick up a stone, making it so that removal of the stone from the world is persistent and other people will see the stone disappear. Sorry, I can see a comment there. There we go. Welcome back, Aaron M. Guy and Fishtifer. Yes, sleep. I understand that my timing isn't good for people's sleep, and I do apologize for that. So off stream, I was meaning to go and continue working on the command stuff, but I decided instead to work on getting the server not sending quite so much data. So something I've been putting off for a long time. It's always been my intention, if I can pull up my server code. Here we go. It's always been my intention to have the server on each tick send out only the diffs of things that have changed. But up until now, it's always just been getting all of the entities and then sending out updates for all the entities. And that's obviously not very efficient. So what I've done off stream, it's not actually implemented yet. Well, it's mostly implemented, but it's not being called yet. I've got this new client game state class, and this is responsible for storing everything to do with everything to do with what we think the client can see. And that way, every time we fetch all the entities from the entity service, we can just generate diffs from what we think the client can see and then send just those diffs out. So this is the bit that's responsible for maintaining our client version of the state. Each tick, it will use this generate delta class to go through all the entities that it can see and work out what it needs to send through to the client. There's still a few bits of code here I haven't implemented. And then whenever the client acknowledges that it's received something or acknowledges that it's fetched the static resources for an area through the REST endpoints, it will go and apply some of those deltas onto its copy of the client state. So while this code here isn't finished yet, it's mostly just these two pieces of generate delta that are missing. I will start to incorporate this, and this should massively reduce the amount of data being sent back and forth. Fishtifer, I'm in Australia, in Sydney, Australia. So it's just after 10 a.m. here at the moment. So this I'll put back on the back burner to continue off stream. This will need a lot of testing, and so it'll probably take me a few more days to get this code here right. So on stream, I'll continue with it being just inefficient, and it's fine just locally, so I'm not too concerned there. And I'm going to continue getting the command code working. Now, the way I intend this to work, let me just get this to reformat. Something's not looking very good here. What have I done? I have no idea. I'll leave that for now. I'll just try that. Is that going to fix it? That looks better. Whenever the client needs to send a command through to the server, so this is when the user performs some action other than just movement actions, it's going to create one of these components, and it's going to store a copy on the player object itself locally so that we can keep track of it fairly easily. And it's also going to then convert this into a remote entity and send it off to the server. Now, it's going to have an ID. This needs to be unique to the client, but this is going to be used to confirm that the that the command has actually executed. We'll use this later. The verb is obviously what we're doing. With object is a structure that defines what we're using to do the action. So this will generally be a slot. Even if you're using a hand axe or a tool, this will generally refer to the slot that's being used, that holds that tool that's going to be used to do the action. And then subject is the thing that we're performing that action on. So you can see up in here that with object at the moment can only be a slot. Whether or not I have other use cases, I don't know. We'll find out later. Let me just recall that this is meant to be capital letters, so I'll just fix things up a little bit as I go. Now the subject, this is a bit more complicated than the with object, because if you're putting something down, you might, well, if you're picking something up, your with object is going to be your slot that you're picking up into. The subject is the thing being picked up, and in the case of picking up, it's going to be an entity ID that you're picking up from the world. You'll also want to be able to specify a quantity that you're picking up, and there'll be some sort of a UI to limit what's being picked up. When you're dropping items, though, your with object will be the slot that you're dropping from, and then your subject is going to be the thing being dropped onto. Now, you thought the subject would be the entity using the item. Yeah, perhaps my naming could be improved. I see where you're coming from there, so I might look at changing my naming here. I kind of almost want it to be the from. Well, okay, this is going to change my. This shows that I'm not thinking about it correctly. I'm actually going to just put a comment here, which is the from. Well, let's think about it. If you're harvesting a tree, I'm expecting this to be the slot holding the tool, and I expect this to be the tree. And that kind of makes sense. You harvest from the tool to the tree, perhaps. When you're dropping something, this is clearly going to be the slot that you're dropping from. And this one is actually going to be the place in the world that you want to drop to. So I need a way of representing that in subject. It can't do that currently. When you're picking up, your from is perhaps the item in the world, and your to is the slot. So, okay, I am going to implement it that way. Again, this isn't really, subject and object are probably not the correct, sorry, subject and, with object and subject are probably not the correct terminology here, but let's just do it as, let's in fact rename this. From reference. Let's call this one to reference. Welcome back, Griffith. Got quite a few people in today. Fairly early. People don't normally come in until later than this. I did not stream yesterday, Griffith. I had a bit too much on, unfortunately. So, but off stream, I did a bit of work on my netcode to work towards reducing the amount of traffic going back and forth and reduce the number of invalidations being sent through. Once I've finished that piece of work, which I'm still not finished, it won't send invalidations on every single frame if nothing's changed within a chunk. Okay. So this terminology here is getting very confusing, but yeah, I agree with you, Fishtova. I think this is a better approach. I I do think there's something special about the concept of with, so the thing that you're performing an action with. If that's true, then I'll get to that later. But for now, we'll just do from and to, because the two actions I want to focus on now are pick up and drop, and from and to make a lot of sense with that. So let's actually do a from and a to. And I'm going to get rid of those comments. I'll fill those out later. The other action the other two actions I have in mind. Well, let's just think through a few of the actions. We've got eating and drinking. Obviously, from in that case can be, it'll be the thing that you're eating. Now, that might be a slot if you're eating berries. You have you might drink from a lake directly, in which case it's actually a location that you're going to drink from in that case, because there is no entity for water. The water in a lake is actually just terrain. So the from reference could be a slot. It can be, we know it could be an entity ID, because you could be picking something up. And I'm also going to put this can be null. I've got a feeling from reference and to reference are actually going to coalesce into the one object here, but let's just stick with it. I think that the other option is that there's a vector 3, which is the target. So this is the case where you're pointing at some water and the client can send through that location, and the server will need to work out that you are pointing at water at that point. So let's just try that out for now. That is not meant to be null. Yeah, so I'm still not sure if instigator is all that clear for me. And the reason is the pickup verb. Do you instigate a pickup with your hand? Or is it the item that gets, well, in that case, it would be your hand that's instigating the pickup. But then it gets a bit more complicated where you've got, well, drinking. I'm going to just stick with, I'm going to confuse myself if I try and explain this. But I guess the benefit that your approach there gets, Griffic, is that the thing that you call an instigator doesn't have as many options. So when you're drinking, you might have no instigator because, it's your mouth or maybe the hand that you use to scoop it into your mouth. So I'm going to have a think about this. The benefit of the from and to reference idea is that these will coalesce into the one object type. Except for this quantity thing. So quantity perhaps lives in the command itself. It's a property of the command. I think I like that. So I think I might stick with this for now and just call this one just a reference. It's a terrible name. Operand reference or something. I'm going to get rid of the to reference. And if this turns out to be wrong, then it's not that hard to fix. So I needed a quantity as well, which is optional. Not all verbs will use a quantity. There'll also be some sort of a richer type here for things like crafting. where it'll need to send through a fair bit of data with a crafting request, because you need to know the recipe that's being crafted. You need to know uh, so you need to know the recipe. You need to know which ingredients are being used, and they themselves are going to be operand references because they're going to be slots in your inventory, things in the area, and stuff like that. Will I be using JSON or NBT? I plan to use JSON, but my JSON format for storing entity data is not that dissimilar to NBT. It's kind of like NBT. It is sorted into components. So my entities have components. My components have key value attributes. That key value attribute is not that dissimilar to the way that NBT does it. Oh, well, other than it being a storage format, obviously. But yeah, it is JSON. Okay. So the protocol is going to be that the client sends through one of these requests as a component on the player object to the server. The server will then receive this, act on it, and then delete this reference. But it will also create another component on the player, which is the response to that command, because the client needs to know when that command has been acted on. It also needs to know if the command failed for some reason, and that will happen. Things like trying to pick up an item that someone else is picking up at the same time, only one of you will be able to pick it up. And so the client is going to need to be able to roll back its attempts to optimize those changes. So if you pick up a stone at the same time someone else does, the client should allow you to pick that stone up immediately. So it should just show that that stone's been picked up. And hopefully as soon as possible, you'll see that that's actually failed, and it needs to roll it back and, maybe give some sort of a UI hint that, maybe make a noise. I don't know. But the goal for me is to make it so that the client opportunistically makes changes to its state, and then only once it sees the result go in will it then go and apply, either leave the changes in there or roll them back. So in here, I'm only going to have a Boolean. And so once the client sees this, if it sees an ID come through with a true result, let's call this success. With true success, then it won't really do much other than perhaps clean up some local record. In general, unless there's some finalization step it needs to do, it won't even need to do that because it will be storing all of its data in this component. The server will be deleting this on behalf of the client. So once the client sees one of these come in, it can just go and delete this as well, and everyone will know. Shouldn't the bool be a can be null? No, it doesn't need to be, because this component won't exist until a result is ready. I think that's fair. So the server, it's possible that on the server side, we'll need to add an extra attribute on the server side copy of this to say that something is in the process of being executed, but that doesn't need to be visible to the client. So this component here gets created by the server only once a result is ready. Now, in the case a false comes through here, the client is going to need a copy of this information here. So I need to have a bit of a think about that. One thing I could do is I could just let the client see the deletion request come in for this and ignore that deletion request until it has seen the result. I'll sort that out when I get to it. But in short, this protocol aims to let the client makes the request. The server can tell the client when it has seen the request through the normal message acking process. It can tell the client when the request has been executed, and it can tell the client what the result of that execution was. And though they're really important that it can do all of those things. Okay. My other option, by the way, instead of having this response, and I may go down this path, and this gets back to Fishtafer's comment of should it have a can be null, I could actually store this with a can be null. It wouldn't be a can be null, it would be a question mark on the command itself. And this might be a better way to do it. In fact, I'm starting to think this is a better way to do it. What that means is rather than the server deleting this when it gets executed, it would place one of these success attributes on this command. And it would then know that it doesn't need to execute this command again because it already has a success on it. Yeah, hardest part is figuring how to keep a reference to a deleted entity. Yes. Yes, that's just a general. It's going to be worse for me in a distributed system because the server itself is going to have that issue as well. If it goes and to do a drop, it needs to do a creation, potentially a creation and a deletion, and it needs to be able to roll back either half of that depending on which half succeeds or fails. So I'll need to put a lot of thought into that. It's all solvable problems. So I could put this instead over on here, and that would become a question mark. The issue with this is that on the server side, I'm obviously going to be polling for these. And by keeping these round longer than I need to, it does mean that we'll keep on seeing them. I don't think that's the end of the world. It's just a bit of data being transferred from the entity service to the ticker service. And it can very quickly see whether or not it has a success value on it. So I am going to go down this path, I think. I'm going to get rid of this command response. And it also means that it's the client's job then to clean up the requests. So once the client sees the success attribute come back, it's responsible for removing one of these. Obviously, the server will internally have some sort of an expiry on a command as well. Once it's set the success, it needs to set an expiry so that it can clean up if the client goes away. But that is similar to what I'm doing on the client action side of things. I don't know, replaying events for a client that are lagging. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, that sounds like an interesting approach, Griffith. All right. So the first thing I want to implement is the pickup command. So I'm not gonna support rollback or any of that stuff yet. Because all I'm trying to do here is get stuff to a point where I can test the game mechanics, and I just don't care about edge cases until people are actually potentially playing this, and then I'll start caring a bit more. So I'm going to ignore. I've got in my verb system, my interaction system, I do have the concept of performers and targets, and I guess this is kind of what Griffith calls an interactor. No, yeah, performer is the player, which I never use. This is kind of an interactor, and this is what's being acted on. I'm going to ignore the fact that I've got duplication of those concepts here. And when it actually does the pickup, so here's the pickup being performed. At this point, I'm going to send through the request instigator. Sorry, what did I say? I can't remember what I said. Did I say investigator or something like that? So It's still going to perform the action locally. And I am going to interactor. Yeah, sorry. It's interactor actually comes from one of the design patterns. Can't remember which one that is. MVP? I can't remember. Interactor in one of the architectural design patterns, it's used instead of service. So some things like MVC and MVP will have the concept of a service. And I think that one of them calls them interactors. I think that's where that's come from in my head. Okay. In here, I've got, what do I actually do? I grab the slot. Okay, get parameters actually parses out. It works out how much we're doing and who's doing what to who. Old item stack is obviously something being refactored that I've not fully refactored. That's a bit embarrassing. We come in here and we say that if it fails to place the item, it asks the inventory system to try and place the item. If it can't do it, then just return. And that is still the case. If the local version of the game doesn't think we can perform the action, there's no point in requesting it from the server. If there's going to be something left after doing the pickup, so in other words, if we don't have enough inventory space to do the pickup, then it is going to go off and do things a slightly different way because it needs to. This is things like leaves. Can I demonstrate this? Let's just try and demonstrate this. I need Unity open anyway at some point. All right, server seems to be running, maybe? No? We're done. Sure, I had this running this morning. Entity type. I want a proper stack in here. The ticker service. Index in the ticker service. Line 50. Oh, yeah, that would do it. It is a bit. I'm always kind of fixing up little bits and pieces before my stream, and so it's not unusual for me to break things. Is static. Entity is static. I think that will fix it. Oh, not assignable to that. Oh, sorry, I missed Fishtifer's comment. This could also use the term operator, the interactor or instigator. Yeah, the funny thing is, Fishtifer, that in my mind, I do think of these as functions, and I'm sure that Griffic would agree. I'm not sure what Griffic's background is, but this is not all that dissimilar to the command pattern, I think it is. Command pattern. What is the command pattern? So a command pattern is just something that you wrap up an operation and all of its parameters into an object, and you can then kind of execute that command later. But the advantage of this pattern is you can also have an undo on those. Does this talk about undo? Yeah, multi-level undo. So by keeping a list of actions, you can perform them in order, or you can undo them in reverse order. And so what does it actually call its parameters? I don't think that it is opinionated about it. Terminology. Here we go. Client, source, or invoker. Button. Oh, okay, that's the thing that was used to perform the action. That's not too different to what we're talking about here. So then you got this is the actual action object. Yeah, they've called it that. Yeah, they don't seem to be opinionated about what you call the parameters. But I do think of these as a bit like functions, reversible functions. And so, I've even used the term operand in my code. But yeah, as you say, it's not clear which ones. The various operands do have very distinct meanings, and it's important that you do distinguish between them. Now, what have I done here? This is unhappy. Property location is missing. Oh, that's okay. That needs to go like that. Yeah, I've changed my protobuf a bit when I started writing the new code to do the proper entity diffing to send back to the client. And while it's not yet integrated, I have made changes to the protobuf, which probably means my client is going to be broken as well. So let's just fix that. Services protoc. Let's just do a yarn, make sure that everything's built. And then I've got that command will copy the C#. Christopher, when I learnt very limited Java programming operators were good math and stuff. Yes, it's kind of funny because once you've got in functional programming, you have functions that have parameters, but you can start thinking of things as being operands as well. So yeah, it's a bit funny. Yeah, and I'm not sure it's smart, Christopher. It's just experience, just practice and experience. All right. Is this going to work? All of this just to do a quick demo of one particular branch. Okay. Run that. Few little graphics glitches there. Go away, troll. Now, I'll just get away from the troll so that he doesn't attack me. We'll find a nice tree, and I'm just going to harvest this tree. I've got a little debug command somewhere in here. I think it's the tilde key, just gives me a stone axe. There we go. I forgot about that in the last episode. Now, if I fully harvest this tree, and then I harvest all of this stuff, we'll just grab a bunch of leaves, harvest, harvest. You notice sometimes the leaves grow. That's because these aren't single items. These are volumetric entities. So now I can pick that up, and you can see we've got 2.5. These are kind of liters from memory. 2.5 liters out of the 4 liters we can hold it under this arm. If I grab another one, I'm only going to be able to grab 1.5 liters of it. So what will happen, you'll see this pile of needles will actually reduce in size. like that. And so we can actually start to do some kind of cool stuff. We can go and pick that up. Got a little bit more space here, pick that up. Now I can go and drop my leaves into that pile and it gets bigger. So this is my volumetric this is my volumetric entity type. 10 sorry, I'm just going to go back over the comments. Uh, I didn't see a lot of these comments. Dog trainer by profession. That's kind of, and I was not expecting a dog trainer to be sitting in on my dev streams. Yeah, so there's the classic thing about, to be an expert, you need 10,000 hours of practice. And there's a Veritasium episode came out in the last few days that actually talks about 10,000 hours not being enough to get better at something. You need to be, there's a few things that you need during your 10,000 hours. You need feedback, you need to make mistakes. And yeah, I recommend looking at the Veritasium episode on becoming an expert in something. And then Griffith, 10 plus years in industry. Yes. So someone on one of my videos asked, it's a high school kid, I think in America, asking about whether or not I went to college and whether or not I'd recommend going to college. And well, we don't call it college over here, it's university over here. For me, it was definitely worth it, but I don't think I use anything really from university that I learned at university anymore. I guess my 3D stuff I've not actually done in industry, and so I guess I use that. The uh, the thing is though that it's hard to get the experience in industry if you don't have the degree, because companies don't companies that do interesting work or that build software well don't want to hire someone without experience. And companies will look at little bits of work you've done as a hobby and they'll look at that, but they really want the degree to hire you without experience. But yeah, I'm an old bloke. I've got, I don't know, over 20 years experience, I think, in industry. Not, I have a not relevant question. Do I like the horror genre? Yes, sometimes I quite like. I mean, it's not really horror, but 7 Days to Die, I quite like. I I quite like the horror genre, yeah. But I'm not planning on using it in this game. Because of the hyper realism, I might go for little bits of tension in the game. Maybe there'll be dungeons with some sort of a sequential story that could be a little bit horror-like. Yeah, the pile sizing feature, that I put a bit of thought into that. And the reason I implemented that is because I wanted these pine needles to be used in construction of the first structure. Yeah, they form the roof, and yeah, I had no idea how to implement it. I like the idea of being able to kind of grab a bundle of something under your arm. And then there are certain things like these sticks. If I go and pick up these sticks, that button didn't work the first time. I don't know what that was about. So this says that you can pick up 10 sticks. But if you were to go and put these in a container, they might take up a lot of space. Perhaps you can carry more than 4 liters of sticks. So because the way you carry them is you bundle them up under your arm. So some of my items are done like that as, oops, I meant to drop that. Some of these items are done as item count, if there's something that you can kind of carry by an end or something like that. Whereas other ones are done as these volumetric entities. Multimedia Uni, they're very helpful for me to build a foundation, could learn from. Yeah. Uh, yeah, programming in multimedia, that'd be interesting. Yeah, certainly what you learn at university is very valuable. The the theory that you learn is quite useful. So performance notation, big O notation is absolutely invaluable. And I've done hiring for jobs before, and the number of people who can't explain who can't compare two algorithms and say which one is going to perform better. Um, and the kind of roles that I've been in, that we just can't consider people who aren't able to tell the difference between an O squared and an O n log n algorithm. They're absolutely critical. Oh, Aaron M guy releasing a game onto Steam. Uh, I think that releasing something onto Steam, I think, is a great milestone. Even if people don't, even if it's not a huge commercial success, I think that it's a great milestone to reach. Yeah, I haven't really thought about the fact that I do have day cycles, and I could potentially do some pretty cool stuff with that. Yeah, so using weight, so I am going for one. People often ask, what do you mean by hyperrealism? And the inventory system is one of the things that I'm trying to keep hyper realistic. So 4 liters is about, I kind of worked it out at some point. It's like a 20 centimeter sphere or something. So if you had assuming these things hold together, then this is the realistic approach. Whereas I definitely don't want someone able to drag a cubic meter of stone behind them. That's just not going to happen. Well, unless it's on a carriage and you've got a horse or something like that. Um, the inventory system is one of the places that I'm going for hyperrealism, and I really want to use it to introduce limitations into the way the player can play, and then not to be annoying, but to give the players new challenges. That's my goal there. All right, I finally caught up on the comments. So that is a demonstration of the volumetric stuff. If I can now find my thing here. So this tends to only happen if, well, it only happens if this was a volumetric thing and you got some stuff left behind. Otherwise, it just goes and destroys whatever the game object was because it's already loaded it up in here. It's already put it into your inventory. So it's in this case, either of these two cases, we want to put a command through to the server. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take the performer, which I believe is the player, dot add component, and I am going to add a new yeah, subcontainers in a backpack. I agree with that. And the other thing is uh, static storage. So, chests and boxes back in your base. Uh, I I've played a bit of Minecraft and I find it so frustrating that it's just so hard to sort your stuff. And I really don't like static inventory systems. So yeah, boxes in bases, you end up just getting things disorganized and it can be a pain. So I probably will go with a more uh um uh sorry, slightly distracted there. I'll probably go with a more logical view of inventory. And so when you put boxes in a base, it will just expand your storage capabilities, but your storage won't necessarily be linked with individual boxes because you can't move them anyway. So I'd rather just have a UI that lets you access your base's storage. I haven't fully fleshed out that idea, but remote command request. It's done by Eve. Eve Online uses a similar system where you have, your spaceship has a certain storage. And the reason I thought of this is Griffith's thing about putting subcontainers in. The uh, you can put containers like the kind of containers you see on the back of a truck into your spaceship as well, and that allows you to then also transfer entire groups of items between spaceships or bases. So I'll probably do something similar. Uh, is the art style going to stay low poly? I haven't decided. There's a lot of people would like me to keep the low poly. One of the things I'm planning on doing as a test is I'm just going to have to do this off screen just in case I'm about to pull up some personal information. Just to find an asset on the asset store. Yeah, here it is. Just make sure I don't have anything personal on the screen. No, looks safe. So I picked up a few of these bundles from Nature Manufacture when they were on a massive sale, and I wouldn't mind just as a test, just trying to implement their terrain textures onto my Hoxel system and just see what it looks like. It'll probably be throwaway, but it'd be interesting to see what it's like. I definitely want to stick with low poly while I'm developing the game though, because the cost to keep everything looking consistent is just too high. I mean, people didn't react well to me putting the high poly mob models into the game uh, as placeholders. I mean, I didn't make it clear that they were placeholders, but yeah, keeping a consistent look in the game I think is important while you're developing it. And so I will stick with low poly because it's just cheaper to maintain. Okay, so I'm going to add a new remote command request. That's meant to be var command request is going to be equal to, what did I call that? That was the performer. Yeah, Eve's a funny game. It's a lot of fun. It's got a very strong sense of community in the game, and community is sort of emergent to the gameplay. So you can't, it's very hard to play solo. You need to group up with other people. And so you do get strong communities building up in the game. And it's very, something I want to emulate myself. The game gets criticized a lot because I've heard it described as gamified spreadsheets in space. And I think that that's a fair criticism. It's got 3D, space battles and things, but the 3D, it's almost like it's just animating the battle, but you play the battle by just clicking on tables and pressing actions within the tables. So you could completely get rid of the 3D nature in Eve and play it entirely on spreadsheets. Yes, low poly is easier to run on crappier systems, and you can make things like that configurable. You need to be a bit careful. I don't know if anyone here's played Valheim. Valheim's a game that has, it's not hyper realistic graphics. It's not AAA graphics, but it's got some nice graphics. But one of the first things proper players do is they turn off all of the scatter. So they turn off the grasses and things like that because they hide resources that are on the ground. So there's a disadvantage to having the graphics turned on beyond performance. Yeah, so I want to be careful. I try to emulate a lot of Eve Online mechanics, but I want to avoid that trap of making it so that you are just, tabbing through targets and then pressing attack buttons and things like that. Now I am going slightly towards that with my combat system by using something similar to the Dragon Age mechanic. So I just need to be careful I don't fall down that trap. Yes. Yeah, you're right there, Griffic. I should definitely make sure that's clear. And yes, I will be using level of detail. Uh, but yeah, that's all far down the track. All right, so command request dot. So we're doing a from here. I know we've got an operand reference. Yeah, you can use You can use spatial search in a voxel system, but you can also, I think that in general, unless you've got a system where people are flying and then you really need a spatial search, I think that you can get away much more easily with graph search. So any any reasonable terrain in a voxel system is kind of 2.5D in a way. I mean, you might have multiple, you might have like a cave entrance that goes under another piece of terrain, but you can still represent that in a graph. It might not be a planar graph, but I think that graph search is still the right way to go for things that are pathfinding on a surface. Thank you for joining, Christopher, and thank you for taking part in the chat. It's a very active comment section today, isn't it? I love it. I love it. Why has that got a question mark on it? I think I must have typed that. Okay, so here we're going to do a slot is going to be equal to, is from always a slot here? Yes, we're going to go with .name, I think it is. The target in this case is going to be one of these. A bit nasty putting one of these raycast hits in there. It's a struct from inside Unity. Oof. All right. I think I can just use point. Normal can be calculated by the server. Game object is also possible. So let's go, what was that called? Target. Yes, I am using ECS on the server. That's correct. Now, why is this? I'm a little bit confused here. Oh yes, in this case, sorry, we because this is the pickup performer, we know that there's a game object being picked up. So this is fine. Const target. No, getting confused between TypeScript and C#. Let's go target remote ID. And this is going to be equal to target game object get component. And we've got this remote. Or remote entity ID. I've got one of those. Do I actually use that? Oh, well, I can find out I'm running the game, aren't I? In here, I can probably just, in scene view, if I just select some remote object, no, I'm not using the remote ID. All right, remote entity data. Jobs for pathfinding. I'm not sure. Not sure what you mean there, Oslath, by jobs for pathfinding. Oh, pathfinding. I'm not sure if this is what you're referring to. Job. Oh no, this is. Yeah, not sure. My client isn't really ECS. It's just using the Unity hierarchical thing at the moment. I will probably port it to ECS, given that I need to. I mean, I'm using it in an ECS way. As you can see in my game hierarchy here, everything's just kind of stored in this game node. And so this is really getting pretty close to ECS, the way I'm actually doing it. Yeah, multi-threading for pathfinding can be a little bit tricky. I'm not sure that that's what OSLATH means. Yeah, okay. Yeah, you've got to be careful. Multi-threading pathing algorithms, many of them they're fine, but you need to make sure that you often get a bottleneck where all your threads are sitting there locked on. For example, in A star, a lot of them will just end up locked on the priority queue anyway, because you spend 95% of your time in the priority queue in algorithms like A star. Pretty much any Dijkstra-based algorithm, uh, you'll get blocked on your queue. And my stuff's in TypeScript, so threading is just not really an option other than background worker threads. Uh, okay, target.gameObject. Sorry, I'm a bit confused here. What's wrong with this? Game object. Game get component. Yes, I did mean to invoke the method. Ah, I see. I was like, yeah. Okay, so I've got a remote entity ID dot. Can't remember how to get my ID out. Why not store the ID? It's a bit silly. Public string ID. Definitely have an ID. Remote entity.id. String, that is a string. Excellent. I don't mind being distracted. It's I enjoy the chatter. Unless you start making me do bugs, then I'll be cranky because it'll be all your faults then. Okay, so when I do an add component, I need to make sure that I set that ID. New data. This feels like duplicated code, but whatever. Data if not exists. It's my oh, it's just ID. Okay, so we have an ID now. So I think we can just pull that straight out of there. Excellent. No insects, but if only that's what was required for bugs. When I when I started on the pathfinding code, and I was starting to think, oh, maybe I could kick this down the road as well, and I was tempted to implement like a bee or something like that as the first aggressive mob, because then I wouldn't have to worry nearly as much about the pathfinding. They could just look at where the terrain was and just fly a little bit above it. It was going to be a bit cheaty, but and instead, I think I got lots of bugs because it would have been a lot easier to do a flying insect. So target is going to be equal to the target remote ID. No. The new operand reference. Entity ID is target remote ID. Okay. Still doesn't like that because... No, this is a new operand reference. There we go. What else do I need? That's everything, isn't it? Operand reference has... We don't need a target. Cool. Yeah, I likely will do something like bees because I think they're, from a resource point of view, they're kind of interesting. Yes, I do. I do write down ideas I have along the way. They all go into a very, very, very large Word document I have. They're largely unsorted though, so yeah, not sure how I'll find anything again. When I run out of ideas, I'll go and start looking through it and see how I go. What have I got here? New operand reference. Why does I want to put a question mark in there? Well, hang on. The from, this is pickup, so I don't... Yeah, that's not meant to be there. That's meant to be there. Here we go. Okay, then last thing, I need to do the command request.quantity. This will actually go inside an if, I think, because it depends on whether or not this is a volumetric item. So parameters dot is it item? What do I transfer in the inventory? Item. Here we go. It's just item. So if item dot I had an is volumetric or something in there. Hmm. Stack. All right, so this doesn't, yeah, this actually kind of makes sense. So when we talk about a stack of items here, this has a single value or that's used, whether this is a discrete item count or a volumetric item. And it's actually up to the item itself as to how that's interpreted. That seems like a reasonable way to do it. I'll just check. I presume I have a new item stack of some sort. I'll just see how I was planning on implementing this. Oh, I didn't get very far on this, did I? All right. So I'm going to use that same definition. No, I'm not. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say if item.itemData dot, how do I work out whether or not this one is volumetric? Item data continuous. I refer to volumetric as continuous. Is continuous. Oh, that's a crazy way of implementing that. I don't know what I was thinking. What is discrete? It still doesn't like that. Item.itemData returns an item data. There is no base class for item data. It's a it's a scriptable object. So this is unit. It's kind of like a the best way of thinking of it is it's like if I were to specify all the instances of this as a JSON blob, and but I get to do it in the Unity editor. So I have all of my different item data parameters defined in Unity itself, and then this just lets me refer to them by having scriptable object. Yeah, do look up scriptable object. It is an awesome feature in Unity. Why is this not? Oh, dot size. I bet you that's meant to be dot size. Item data dot size dot is discrete. It's not like an interface. It's like a it's almost like an enum where I have a fixed number of different item datas. In fact, I can probably show you non-code. I can find my actual item datas in here. Even if you can't see this, I'll find it easier to talk through. And this is not looking happy. There we go. So I've got items. And so under my items folder in my project, I've got my models and things, but then I've also got these item data definitions. So one for flat stone, one for round stone, and in here I can specify whether or not it's volumetric and what its area is, what its volume is. Trees, what's tools? No, under trees you can see I've got spruce needles, and this is defined as continuous. By default, there are 2.5 liters of 2.5 liters in a stack by default. And so it's really just a way of having pre-instantiated objects. I think of it as being more like a configuration file. So you can imagine having a configuration file with a section for raspberries, a section for spruce branches, a section for spruce needles, a section for spruce sticks where you specify the properties of those, and then you can refer to those instances later. It's quite a nice little feature. Yeah, data prefabs. That's a really good way of putting it. I've seen people use them to implement singleton, which I would not recommend. It's just a complete misuse of the feature and can have side effects. You don't want to be modifying your scriptable objects at runtime, otherwise sometimes they'll persist and save to your scene. Yeah, very strongly would not recommend it. But I love the term data prefabs. They're a little different to uh, they're a little different to prefabs in that a prefab is a template that you instantiate. So when you instantiate a prefab, you get a game object, you get a distinct game object out of it. Scriptable objects have an added benefit that they have reference equality. So if you have two different references to a flatstone scriptable object, those references will be equal. They don't get copied from memory, if I remember correctly. Yes. A lot of people don't know about scriptable objects. They should. What have I done in here? So if it is discrete, then command quantity is going to be a new quantity, which is going to be items, and then this is going to be parameters dot item dot quantity. Is that right? That looks right. And then we can do an else. But in here, I'm going to go, oh, that is quantity, but instead of items, this is going to be CCs. So just for reference, I do use cubic centimeters as my unit for volumetric items. For any Americans, I don't know what that is, a 30th of an ounce or something like that. It's just a nice, convenient, small quantity that unlikely to need a reference smaller than it. All right. So I think that creates the component and updates it. So I'm actually going to test this. It's not sending it out to the server yet. Restart my server just in case. Oh, well, I'm not making any server changes, so I probably don't need to do that. Just realized I don't have Discord running. I'm gonna, hopefully it doesn't open it on the wrong screen. Excellent. I didn't fix up my message that came out of Restream. I promised I'd start updating that message. Okay, where are we at? This is going to play. Now, in theory, when I pick up a stone, we should have an attribute added to, if this is going to play, should have an attribute added. What are we doing here? Might have to kill it. Oh, it seems to be alive. Go. Okay. Oh, really got to get rid of that troll. I'll do it in a second because the client won't see him disappear yet because my diff code isn't finished. Let's just get out of range of him. And then if we pick up a stone, just to get this, I want to select the player who is probably in the world as the player. Yep, here's my player. We've got remote entity ID component here, so I probably do want to start using the remote entity ID component. Now, when I pick this up, am I in the game? I am in the game, but something has locked up. We're not on a breakpoint. There we go. We've got a command request. I don't have an ID or a verb. So that obviously needs to happen. Let's see here. When we create it, we need to give it an ID. .id. I'm actually going to put that in the constructor. And is that reasonable? I think that's reasonable. Because I do just want to generate random IDs here. Alt insert constructor. No, we don't want to do any of that stuff. Oh, well, we can specify a verb in the constructor. And the ID is going to be I think I'll just specify some random data. You do random bytes. I could do a UUID, but I think I'll just do C# random bytes. Next bytes. Ah, not a static. All right. Ah, this is so dodgy. Dot next bytes. I presume this defaults to being initialized in some sensible way. Yes, yes it does. Excellent. So I won't get the same bytes every time. I'm just going to send through the number of bytes. No, it's a byte buffer. I had an ID converter class. No. All right, let's go C# byte array to hex string. Yeah. Could have sworn I had an ID converter. In fact, this is a fair point. How do I transfer these on the wire? Just got to find my protobuf file. And when a command comes in, well, these just come in as entity updates. Yeah, so this is just an ordinary attribute. I'm just going to do a new GUID. GUID dot new GUID. There we go. That will do. Not ideal. But all I want is something that works. And now we can just specify a verb. And we'll get... Oh, can I pass parameters in here? No, I can't. That was a bit silly. You're not allowed constructor parameters on a component, which makes complete sense. So I'm just going to call this init, void init that. Okay. Command request dot init, and this is going to be pickup. Awesome. Okay, sorry, I'm checking that my OBS window is happy. So running this again, close that out. Oh, I'm going to delete my troll before I load that back in. Where is he? He is here. That's the troll. So I should just be able to hit up his endpoint. Wait, that's not his endpoint. I think that's the troll deleted. Okay, this is not happy for some reason. What's it doing? Thinking about compiling. Excellent, troll is indeed gone. Now, when I look at my player, he's there, we pick up a stone, and we do indeed get an ID, pickup verb, and I can't remember if I can turn on debug somehow in here. If anyone knows how to turn on debug to see those other fields. Reset, remove, move up. Scene. Debug. Okay, it still doesn't tell me what I wanted. That's fine. I will just assume that all these other fields are set correctly, because I can't be bothered making everything serializable, I don't think. I'm not sure why it's not displaying them. I wonder if it's the optional that's an issue. Quantity, I can understand it wouldn't be displaying. Not to worry. So whenever we send a message out to the server, I need a datagram. Do I have a datagram generator class? No. So I've obviously bundled everything up into the one thing, and it's going to be in either remote session or server manager. Remote session, here we go. This is where it sends data out to the server. It gets a stream, it gets a payload. Here's the buffer. Okay. Oh, all of this needs to change as well. So this is still sending out just the location of the player, which means that this is obviously highly susceptible to teleport bugs. This is meant to be just sending through commands and potentially sending through the location we think we're at, just so the server knows that things are in sync. But yeah, this code all needs to change. Check for any pending commands. So a pending command is one where we have a command, but the server has not echoed it through to us, right? That'll make sense in a moment. Echoed it through to us. Because you can see here we have one of these remote commands, but we don't have any remote entity data, including a copy of this command. So as far as we're concerned, the server has not seen this. So we're going to get components remote command request. If I could spell, there we go. Now, I'm not going to be streaming a huge amount longer today. I just got a bit too much on, unfortunately. Okay, so I need to check the ones that the server knows about. So that's going to be get component remote entity data. Now that could be null. Oh, there's no question mark operator in. Okay. I'll just assume it's set for now and then fix it so that it only does this if it's defined in a moment. So the remote data is meant to have I apparently don't store the components. And I don't really need to. I could just change the remote entity data, not the remote entity data. I could change the remote command request class to store its own state as to whether or not it's been. So here we've got success. We can store whether or not the server knows about it. That's easy enough to do. So I'm going to put status on here, and I'm going to make this an enum, create a type, enum, and this one is going to be initial, acknowledged, success, and failure. They're the only states. So either we hold it and the server has not acknowledged it yet, or the server has acknowledged it and not executed it, or it could have succeeded, or it could have failed. I don't think this is yeah, it wants to rename all of these. Then so that status is going to get set to initial. The way this is working, just a little bit of a recap. Whenever packets are being sent from one end to the other, we always assume that that the other end of the connection has not seen whatever we sent through last, because we're sending through like 10 packets a second. It's conceivable that a packet could take more than 100 milliseconds to get through. So the way we handle that is we always resend data whenever we don't know for sure that it's being received by the other end. So when this is initial, we just leave it as initial and we will add something to the buffer. So where's our stream coded? Okay, I think it's just buffer dot no, it's client message. So client message dot entity updates. I need this entity update. This is the player update. So here we just do the player update. Dot generic components dot add we're going to put a new component update in here. Can we put an ID? I'm not sure if we're meant to. We are meant to, because we need to tell the server to create a very specific ID here. If the server receives this update multiple times, we need to make sure it knows to always operate on the same one. So we need to control the ID from this side. Now, this is a bit of a weakness in my protocol, I think, because for that reason, I probably need to be able to guarantee that the server, that these IDs are unique globally. So I need to have a bit of a think about that. The component ID can be the request.id. That's not going to be happy because that needs to be from UUID. That's happy. So there's my UUID converter. It's just a function here in this class. It's a bit dodgy. The update type has to be an update. I can't do create here. In fact, I'm starting to wonder if I'll ever do create, because you can never risk something getting created multiple times just because something's being retransmitted, because things do get retransmitted in my architecture. We give it a type, which is remote. I'm going to call it client. Quick has a server and client send a bunch of IDs to each other. And the first encrypted message to the client and server can change their identities later. Yeah, so I can do the same thing in my protocol. That actually happens over HTTP in my protocol. A session has an identifier, a bunch of IDs to each other. Yeah, that's quite interesting. So the server could reserve some IDs, send them through to the client, and then the client could just it could use IDs off that. It's similar to, I think Postgres has a similar, well, most SQL servers have a similar process where you can go and request some pre-generated IDs and then go and assign those into your items that you're going to go and create. So yeah, that's a great idea, Graphic. I think I might use that. But this will work for now. I'm actually not sure that this is that this needs to be globally unique. I need to confirm that. Does this need to be globally unique? Yeah, so in my protocol, I do have a session ID, so the client can disconnect and reconnect. Well, it's UDP, so there's no such thing, but it could theoretically change its route and just send through that same session ID. In my protocol, those session IDs are not encrypted, and it's important for me that they not be encrypted because I need to look up the encryption keys. You do need some kind of an ID that's unencrypted I'm pretty sure that's like absolutely true. You need to have a way of looking up the encryption key to be able to interpret something. So there has to be something unencrypted in there, some sort of an identifier. Component ID, update that. Type is a remote command request. And then attributes. Why is it not autofilling that for me? Component attribute. Ah, go away. Sorry, everyone. I thought I had the spam protection turned up to full. Now I can't work out how to block. Wow, getting heavily attacked here. Is that mostly cleaned up? Hold on 1 second. I just need to get my own session into... apologies if I get some feedback here. I'm just loading the stream just so that I can see the chat. Yep, excellent. I seem to have cleaned that up. I have no idea if one of those bots I just banned were mine or someone else's. They seem to be using the Nightbot to do some of that. So Nightbot just got banned from our channel. All right. Close that down. Yep, that looks a bit better. Close that window. Now I can turn my sound back on. There we go. I thought I had all my spam protection turned up to full. It certainly is on my regular videos. I get anything even remotely suspicious gets held for review on my normal videos. All right. I've lost OBS now as well. There it is. Hello, Ifman, and welcome. Not going to be streaming a huge amount longer today. So, a remote command request. But now is probably as good a time as any to give a recap of what I'm doing. I'm currently making it so that the client can send commands to the server, focusing at the moment on getting the pickup command working so that the player can pick up a stone and have the stone actually disappear from the world. It works on the client side. All the harvesting still works on the client side, but not on the server side, so other players wouldn't see those changes. So what do I need to send through? I've got the ID. I'm going to resend that ID as an attribute as well. So let's do that. We need the attribute, the ID, the verb. Oh, I seem to have lost a bunch of the chat. Have I just disconnected something? Apologies if I have. The problem with spammers. Oh, I appear to still be live. I always thought the advantage of being an unpopular stream is that those guys would leave us alone. Sorry, I'm still a bit put out by that. I'll get over it. I'll get over it in time. Yeah, this is continuing on my work from 2 days ago. Okay, so a component attribute we need, is it called name, is going to be ID. And the int value, no, string value, I'll make the request.id. Then I need, and I've just been told we've had 100 messages today, probably a little bit of help from the spammer, but yeah, 100 messages. Well done, guys. New component attribute. Oh, you didn't even notice them. Yeah, strange. Maybe YouTube did catch them. No, they came in through YouTube. Yeah, it's possible that YouTube caught them and that Restream, which is I use Restream to handle the video going out to both YouTube and Twitch, and it also handles all the comments. So it might have seen the comments come in and put them on my chat view. They look like they did go through to Twitch as well, and I can't see how to delete them. So apologies for. I think we have someone over on Twitch. We got two people on Twitch, so apologies to those people for having to see the spam. Okay, so we've got an ID. We've got a verb. Is going to be string value is request.verb. What else have I got? Now, I can't do nesting here. Okay, so Nightbot made it through. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, there are a couple of others with less safe for work names from memory. All right. I've got the verb, but I can't do nesting of these. So I'm going to have to use like dot notation or something in here. So because we're doing pickup, this is always going to be an entity ID for now, but let's do from is going to be, oh, sorry, I said from dot entity ID dot from dot entity ID. I definitely need to get this looking a bit tidier, but let's do from.slot is request.from.slot. What else do I need to send through? So it could be a slot, it could be an entity ID. I'm not going to implement target right away. Oh, I guess I should. Pickup will be a lot easier to implement if I have target. Oh, sorry, drop will be a lot easier to implement, I should say. So from dot target, I guess I could go and do. Just going to set them all through target dot x. Very repetitive. Most of this stuff, if it's not defined, it's going to be null, and I believe it will actually just get swallowed. Oops, what am I pressing? It'll get swallowed up by the thing that actually generates these messages to go out to the server. Y dot y dot z z. It doesn't like those because that no. Oh, this is meant to be a float. Float value, and float value. Now I'm going to go and repeat all that code. It's still not right. Can I apply operator question mark to vector? Vector is a struct, right? Yeah, vector is a struct, so that should be okay. Ah. Okay. I'm going to put conditionals around these. We'll just make that a new list. think that's going to initialize properly without it. So doesn't like this because I'm not specifying. Oh, I don't have a close bracket. That's easily fixed. Then what I want to do is update.add var component update. Just going to temporarily delete all this code. Oh, no, I can see the problem is just a brace imbalance. That looks a bit better. Yep. The component update is going to be equal to that. Attribute updates. Okay. I'm really not liking this. Component update dot attributes. Here we go. Dot add. And then I can give it one of these. Here we go. I just need to make some of these conditional, is the only thing. So the same for the verb. So grab that line there, repeat that, pull that out, and we get that. Okay. So now I can say that we only execute the next bit if there is a from. So if request.from has value, then we do those two. Well, these need to be conditional. So if request.from.entity So if we have an entity ID, then set the entity ID. This is all very verbose. What am I doing here? That doesn't need to be there. That doesn't need to be there. Yeah, I'm still a bit confused, Graphic, as to why YouTube didn't filter that. Maybe it just tries to push. It could be because I'm in ultra low latency mode. They might turn off a lot of their filtering for ultra low latency mode. Oh, right. Where are we? That. So we've done the entity ID. If the slot is defined, then set from slot. Okay, if request dot from, I really need to factor this out at some point. We've got a target. This one has value. Excellent. I find the distinction between classes and structs with optionals really frustrating in C#. And update.attributes.add. Is there an add all? Add range is probably not quite what I want. Right. I'll just add these individually. New one of those, like that. That. I keep pressing the wrong page up, page down button. There we go. Yeah, structs, they're kind of stored as values. So in terms of memory layout, they don't have a pointer to them. They just get stored in just contiguously in memory, wherever you define them. So in this case, we've got .target. You can see this is a struct. And so inside this struct, we've got a pointer to a string, a pointer to a string, and then an actual vector in place because vector itself is a struct. And for some reason, while structs have this question mark type, which I quite like, classes don't allow an optional type. So they just reuse null, which I find a bit frustrating. I would rather be able to make this an actual question mark, which literally my editor won't even let me do, because that would make this code more consistent. I'd be able to do .has value rather than not equal to null. A bit frustrating. Oh, right. I think I can do it if I use the... In here, I think I can do like that. Yeah, this is probably actually slightly neater anyway. So I am going to do that. This is just saying, is it actually defined? Give it a name. And then in here, I can actually just refer to it by its name. Yeah, from a language design point of view, I find it a bit frustrating because the user of a class or a struct shouldn't need to care whether it's a class or a struct. They're so similar, and there's no naming convention to differ between them. So I find it a bit weird. Is that entity ID? And in here, we can just do entity ID. Yeah, this is a much better, at least I get consistent syntax here. And I get rid of a bunch of my question marks because it knows inside this brace, it knows that target is not an optional. Okay, and then lastly, I think I need to go and repeat all of this. You're fat fingering the phone keyboard. I'm fat fingering my PC keyboard. I'm going to do this whole thing with, is this going to, I was hoping IntelliJ would let me convert to this style, because what I actually want to do in here, I don't want to use request.from. I want to use the same pattern, is that from, but I'm going to call this operand, because then I just get to copy and paste this entire section of code, because I don't do functions. But request.from, this just becomes operand. In fact, anywhere I do request.from, I can just replace that with operand. Operand. So now I can repeat that same piece of code. Right, we've got that line there. Something's not right here. I'm missing a brace there. That looks better. So yeah, if I copy and paste this, yeah, I don't do functions. Functions are for the weak. You get more code by not using functions. Makes you feel more productive. Two. Oh, I didn't realize that scoped out. Local variable name cannot be declared in this scope because it would give different meaning to operand, which is already used. All right, maybe I am going to have to. Yeah, copy pasta is the best pasta. Yeah. I am going to have to put all of this because I don't want to have to edit all this code. So that is as good a reason as any to extract a method. Bundle operand attributes. Bundle operand attributes. There we go. And instead of operand, I'll call that from. See, the only time I do functions is when it's actually going to save me effort. Request.to is one of these days I will learn that is most of the time. Bundle operand attributes to into the component update. Thank you, IntelliJ, for the refactor. What else have I got on my remote request? We've got those two operands. We need the quantity. We don't send the status. Say if request.quantity is quantity, then component update attributes add equal to. Now the name's a bit tricky here because I need to work out whether or not it is. I need to work out what kind of a quantity this is. So if it is a items, then we are going to send through quantity.items. Otherwise, it's going to be a quantity.cc's. Now, I know that I'm not checking that at least one of those is defined, but I'll deal with that if and when it comes up. So then the int value, these are always integers, is going to be equal to quantity.items get value or default quantity.cc's value. Yep. So this will crash if one of those isn't defined. I'll be good about this. Let's go quantity.items.as value, if not that, and not CCs dot has value. How smart is IntelliJ going to be? Not smart enough. What's wrong with this? Get value or default just expects an integer in there. This one expects an integer in there. This one returns an integer. Oh, it's just the, oops, just the semicolon, maybe. That's better. Okay, so as I said, there's no need to send the status through to the server. It doesn't care what we think the status is. I think I might look at finishing up here. I know it's not been a very productive stream in terms of getting through this stuff. But from here, I think it's just a matter of getting the server to accept these. I probably won't get the server off stream. I'll just put in the boilerplate. It's not actually going to do any of the pickups or anything like that. And then on my next stream, which I expect to be Monday morning, so well, good timing, Griffith, because I'm about to head off too. So Monday, which is 3 days away. So Sunday evening in US, Sunday night in Europe. I'll stream again and actually implement this for pickup on the server and see how far we get. So thank you everyone for joining me. It was a very noisy chat, which is awesome. I love to see it. And I will see you guys next time.